Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/entitledparents. So let's sit back, relax and enjoy some Reddit stories. I'm the pilot's daughter, not a babysitter. This story takes place around 2007 when I was about 15 or so. For a short backstory, my dad was a pilot for a little over 20 years and retired about 8 years ago due to poor health. In 2007, he was still flying for a private charter company who gave him a semi-old Merlin to fly. His job was to fly the owners of the plane to anywhere they needed to go to run their businesses in the US, or take them on vacation with their families. Though around this time, my parents were filing for a divorce, and my dad decided I needed a vacation from my toxic mother. So after getting the okay from the boss he was scheduled to fly, my dad surprised me and told me he was taking me with him to Florida for a few days. Obviously, I was super excited, since I loved flying with my dad in co-pilot ever since I was little. Of course, I loved watching him work. It was always really cool. Now, onto the story. My dad and I got up at around 4 AM and drove to the small airport he had parked his plane. He left it there when he wasn't working, so he wouldn't have to make the 4+ hour drive into the big city where his bosses were stationed at. After we flew to the small charter airport in the big city, we prepared the plane by cleaning the leather seats, restocked the cooler of drinks, and once his boss and his family arrived, my dad and I loaded up their luggage. Already, my dad was a bit uneasy. You see, with a Merlin, you're not supposed to load up the backside of the plane with too much weight, as it causes the tail to dip a bit. If you load it too much, it can either cause the plane to tip backwards or potentially damage the tail on takeoff. Luckily, my dad managed to convince his boss to leave behind things they wouldn't really need on the trip, so their personal driver could take it back home. Boss and my dad got along pretty well, and he made sure to always take my dad's word very seriously, since my dad was an expert pilot. Boss's wife, on the other hand, was a very entitled person, who will now be called Angie. She brought a nanny with her, let's call her Steph, that was her personal friend. Steph's job was to babysit Angie's 2 boys, around 5 and 6, and also babysit Angie's 1-year-old baby daughter while on this trip. Dad was already a bit angry, because he had already put in their flight plan that we only had 6 people and 1 infant in total on the plane, and didn't know Angie was bringing Steph. Now, he needed to make a few phone calls to fix this so he wouldn't get in trouble with the FAA. While my dad was doing this, Angie was whining and moaning about how hot it was sitting in the plane, and was whining about my dad taking so long. Thankfully, boss told her to stop and reassured her we would take off soon. Already, I had a bad impression of her. This was gonna be a long flight. We took off from the airport, and while the family and Steph sat in the back, my dad got to work. He was talking back and forth with the tower, getting clearance on turning and ascending to higher altitudes. Saying things like, "Number X departure, airport we left, en route to Florida Airport, requesting ascent to 8,000. I could hear it all from my headset, as I watched him work the console. We were about an hour into our flight when I noticed a flashing light on the console. I looked down to see it was coming from what I call the plane status gauge, and it was blinking red for the right wheel compartment. I asked my dad if that was normal, and he seemed a bit confused. However, he reassured me that it shouldn't be a problem. A few minutes later, the right side began to shake pretty badly in a rhythmic way. And we knew that was not turbulence. I asked him, since on his GPS it said we were near another major city, if we should land and find out what's going on. He agreed, and after talking to boss, we landed safely. While we waited in the terminal for Boss and Dad, I was watching the news in the main lobby while Angie and Steph, who was holding the baby, complained about the stop. Why did he have to land? We're going to be late. Yeah, like, didn't you have a reservation at some rich restaurant? Yes, I'm going to have to call my driver to cancel it. I can't believe this guy is trying to ruin this for me. I'm going to have to talk to my husband about why he bothers with him. He's clearly incompetent, and he looks like he's lazy. I mean, look how fat he is. I was nearby, listening, the whole time, as this arrogant woman was belittling my father behind his back. My dad is a very large man with Russian qualities. He had a very stern face most of the time, icy blue eyes, and has been through too much stick in his life, which has made him have a very straight-to-the-point attitude. I respected my dad, and hearing her talk bad about him just made me furious. However, I didn't want to get my dad into trouble for saying anything, so I just kept quiet and watched TV. After about 2 hours of waiting, we find out the problem with the Merlin. It turned out that as we were taking off, a piece of metal debris that was on the runway got sucked up into the wheel compartment of the right side, causing the landing gear's hydraulics to not lock the wheels into place once the wheels went up. It was constantly moving up and down, tearing up the insides and damaging the wheel. We got very lucky that we decided to land, otherwise it would have made it very dangerous for us to fly or land safely in Florida, if we made it there. So my dad personally began to make calls to arrange another charter flight for Boss and his family with the company at this airport, while Boss stayed with the plane to hear what it was going to cost to fix it. Meanwhile, Angie is letting her 2 boys run around the terminal like wild monkeys. They were annoying the staff, leaving a mess, and overall just being wild animals. However, I don't blame them. The only source of entertainment was the TV and a pool table on the restricted second floor. The in-ground pool that was out back was closed due to cracks that needed to be repaired. I look to Angie and say this. Excuse me, ma'am, it's not really safe to let them run around. Your kids could get hurt. Oh, OP, they're fine. Boys will be boys. You can just look after them. I blink. You want me to look after them? Of course, you've clearly been watching them, so you can just babysit them for now. After all, your dad said it will take a few hours, right? Steph and I are having some wine while we wait. She had Steph buy some bottles from the liquor store for the trip. Since she's watching my baby, our hands are tied. You sure that's a good idea? It'll be fine. I need my mummy time, so you can handle it, right? My boys are sweet, so if you tell them to stop, they'll listen. That didn't happen. I ended up chasing the boys around the airport terminal for about 3 hours, telling them to stop or just trying to keep them from getting into more trouble. I had to pull them out of offices, keep them from crossing the do not enter line for the pool, keep them out of the fridge in the pilot lounge, and many times I had to run outside to keep them from going out onto the airport taxiway. I didn't want to get blamed if they were run over or got seriously hurt from the equipment out on the ramp. While I was running around making sure these two didn't get into more trouble, Angie continued to whine and complain about how long it was taking to leave, and how, "We're not going to make it to the beach today. This trip is going to be ruined. How could he do this to us?" My boys were looking forward to the beach. It was finally around 9 PM when the boys passed out in the chairs in the terminal, and I was beyond exhausted, so I collapsed on the couch. My dad came in to check on me, and he noticed how exhausted I was. He asked me if I was alright, and I made sure to quietly tell him what happened. I even pointed over to Angie and Steph, who were laughing while finishing off their second bottle of wine, pretty drunk while the baby slept in her carrier beside them. My dad was ticked, but he was proud of me for trying to make sure he didn't get into trouble. He knew he couldn't take Angie on by himself since she was boss's wife. However, he knew how to get her into trouble in a professional manner. He called his boss and told him that they needed to talk about another safety issue that came up. When boss shows up, he asks my dad what's wrong, and my dad said this: "Sir, I just wanted to let you know that your wife and nanny have had about 2 bottles of wine, and I will have to inform the pilot who will be flying you to Florida." "Really? Why?" "You see, if someone is intoxicated while flying in a small charter plane like ours, it's very dangerous. A pilot will be obviously in the front seat and unable to watch your wife and nanny. If your wife or nanny had any complications, got sick or needed any medical attention, there would be a high possibility that the pilot wouldn't be able to help or land quick enough to help them. Not to mention, one of them could open the hatch door and could risk hurting everyone." The last part was BS, since most hatches were set up to only open in an emergency and were very hard to open. The boss is visibly fuming at this point. What do you suggest?" Seeing as how Steph is intoxicated as well, I would believe it would be safer to wait until tomorrow morning to leave. It's not a good idea to put your kids in danger, especially at an airport or in the air. Thankfully, my daughter was able to keep them from going out onto the ramp, but I would seriously consider your options when flying, sir. Boss walks over to his wife and Steph, and after arguing with her for a good while, he tells them they are staying a night in a hotel, and he and the kids will head to Florida ahead of them since he had a meeting first thing in the morning. Angie began to complain and yell at her husband, who quickly shut her down and told her he would send her home if she did not listen to him. And since Steph got drunk on the job, he told her she would be fired if he caught her doing that around the boys again. He even gave me $200 for keeping his kids out of trouble for Steph, which I shared with my dad. Boss left with the kids, the 2 women were taken by a driver to a hotel, and my dad and I took the flight all the way back home since we weren't needed to fly them anymore. We ended up going to Colorado about a few weeks later once the plane was fixed. Had a blast. I just want to say, whoever wrote that story is really good at writing stories, because that was really good throughout the entire thing. But yeah, I didn't even know anything about private planes or stuff like that, because I thought, oh, people always take alcohol on private planes, but I guess not. Father picks up my dog and tries to steal her. There is a local park that my husband and I like to take our dog to on the weekends. We are actually quite friendly with most of the people there because a lot of them are there every weekend like us. My dog likes people and likes other dogs, so she always has a super good time. She's not very good with kids though, and we assume it's because she's not used to them, because we are child-free. Anyway, this was a few months ago. We were at the dog park, like usual, and my girl was romping around. After a little while, I noticed a man and his young son that I had never seen before in the park. It's an enclosed park, so you can't let your dogs off the leash, so they definitely came in on purpose. They didn't have a dog with them that I could see, but I figured maybe their dog was just running around somewhere. I also noticed that they seemed to be going up to people in the park and talking to each of them, but I figured they were just making conversation and didn't think much of it. After a few minutes, they got over to my husband and me. After a few pleasantries, the father started with his pitch. The reason we stopped by is Kid here, I can't remember what the boy's name was, wants a dog, and we promised to get him one for his birthday. So, we thought we'd come talk to the dog owners and see what breeds they recommend. Oh, okay. I thought that this was a weird thing to do because you can just Google it, but whatever. Meanwhile, my dearest husband is throwing the tennis ball with our dog behind me and not paying much attention. I like that one, Daddy, pointing at our dog. Is that your dog? Yep. I won't write everything out, but at this point he starts to ask me questions like how old she is she healthy, how much does she eat, does she behave, etc. I answered his questions because I thought he was just going to look for a similar dog or the same breed. Also, my husband is still oblivious behind us. Well, she couldn't have cost you much. Would you take, say, $20 for her? At this point, my husband kind of hears our conversation and comes over. Sorry, our dog isn't for sale. But come on, you've seen how much Kid likes her. Don't you guys want her out of your way so you can start having kids of your own? My head really wants to explode at that comment, but I don't even bother telling him we're child-free because that's none of his business. The answer is no. I suggest you go to a shelter. There are plenty of dogs waiting for a home there. Well, fine. Have it your way. I will, 'cause, you know, it's my dog. Daddy, can I at least play with the puppy before I leave? The entitled father looks at us. My husband and I are a little hesitant because, like we said, our dog is not that used to kids, and we just know this dad is the type to sue if anything goes wrong. But our dog was kind of hanging around and sniffing at the kid, but she still looked calm and happy. And since they seemed to back down, we didn't want to punish the kid because the dad was being an entitled jerk. Just for a few minutes. So my dearest husband gave the kid our tennis ball and they started playing. It was fine for a few minutes, and my husband and I went to sit on a bench, but we kept an eye on them. We kind of talked for a bit about how weird the dad was before my husband suddenly stops mid-sentence. What's he doing? I look over and the dad has picked our dog up and is walking towards the exit of the dog park. No way. We immediately get up and head over, and my dearest husband tells the man to put the dog down. Luckily, he does. He was clearly hoping to sneak out of the park before we noticed, and she goes bouncing away happy as can be. My husband tells the man to not ever touch our dog again. I wish I could explain to you how furious my husband looked. It takes a lot for him to get angry. But our dog is his baby, and his girl. He's the one who wanted her. I was hesitant at first, though I wouldn't trade her for anything now. He's also the one who primarily raised and trained her. I work a lot and his schedule is more flexible than mine. Luckily, it didn't come to any major scuffle where we had to call the police or anything. The dad just muttered something about us being selfish. Yeah, because not just giving you our dog is us being selfish. The logic of entitled people is weird. And then they just left the park. The kid looked disappointed, but he didn't say much. I don't have much blame for the kid in this scenario. I think he just genuinely wanted a dog, and his dad decided to go about it the most entitled and douchiest way possible. I've not seen them back at the park since, but I have talked to a few other regulars from there, and they all said yes, the dad did ask them if they'd be willing to sell their dog for $20. Of course, they said no. That is one strange character, wow. Oh, and I'm also gonna put pictures of the dog on screen as OP kindly uploaded a few. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now, or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like. And if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.